Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one.
Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one.
Namo sadanto suchendoye alahadi samya sambuddhoje.无上甚深微妙法，百千万劫难遭遇。我今见闻得受持，愿解如来真实义。The unsurpassed, deep, profound, subtle, wonderful Dharma in 100,000 million eons is difficult to encounter. Now that I've come to receive and hold it within my sight and hearing, I vow to fathom the thus come one's true and actual meaning. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's Sutra lecture. Today is February 23rd, 2013, and we're in Berkeley, California. And Guo Shunshi and myself, Qingwei, will be giving tonight's lecture. What I would like to first invite everybody to do is to recite the title of the sutra, which is on the first page of the sutra text. It's Namo Dafang Guangfo Huayan Jing Huayan Haihui Fo Pusa. So if you could please join in. Namo Dafang Guangfo Huayan Jing Huayan Haihui Fo Pusai. Namo Dafang Guangfo Huayan Jing Huayan Haihui Fo Pusai. Namo Dafang Guangfo Huayan Jing Huayan Haihui Fo Pusai. Namo Dafang Guangfo Huayan Jing Huayan Haihui Fo Pusai. Namo Dafang Guangfo Huayan Jing Huayan Haihui Fo Pusai. Namo Dafang Guangfo Huayan Jing Huayan Haihui Fo Pusai. Namo Dafang Guangfo Huayan Jing Huayan Haihui Fo Pusai. So, if you have people who are new, please feel free to take a seat in the front row or fill in any of the spaces. We're very happy to have people come. One joke we always have is, we're vegetarians, so you don't have to worry, we won't eat you. So if I can invite people to open the sutra text. Today we're on page 12 and 13. We're on the fourth ground of this text is called the Avatamsaka Sutra, and we're on the 10th ground, which is a section of the Avatamsaka Sutra, or the Flower Garland Sutra. And we're on the 10 grounds chapter, we're on the fourth ground, or you can say the fourth stage. And so basically, this book, this text, is a handbook for a bodhisattva cultivating the Bodhisattva path to Buddhahood. And in the Avatamsaka Sutra, it outlines, you can say, 52 stages of practice from step by step. And so actually the 10 grounds correlates to steps 40 to 50. So on the 4th ground is the 44th stage. So we're quite a ways down the path here on this text. And I see a couple new faces, so I thought maybe one thing to share in terms of introducing this text is maybe, before we launch into it, just my own experiences learning this text particularly. Namely, when I first picked up the Avatamsaka Sutra, I found it a little bit hard to approach, a little bit hard to kind of conceive of, because it's something, you can say, it was a little bit beyond my experience. But what I found was that over time, it wasn't so much that the sutra was difficult to believe or follow, but rather it was just because my own scope of my own mind wasn't large enough to encompass it, or not to encompass it, to let it come in. And so over the years, I found that that this text has really come alive for myself in terms of being able to practice Buddhism. And I was reflecting on it, and one thing that I thought was really helpful in that process was drawing near good people, particularly drawing near good teachers. I remember sitting where a lot of you are sitting now and listening to sutra lectures and hearing stories about the Venerable Master or great practitioners of the past, and hearing their experiences and hearing their stories and finding them pretty inconceivable. Something that I go, wow, that's not something I usually experience in my day-to-day life. But because where they came from was this really, you can say, virtuous place, this extremely wholesome place, that I could connect with it from my own heart. It was a sense of, wow, this is really good. This is really something that I can take part in. And it's something in Buddhism, it's that we all share. We all share this kind of virtuous foundation in our being. Our nature is awakened and virtuous. And so I found that could connect with that part. And bit by bit, as I listened and learned more, all those elements in the Avatamsaka started coming forward with a new light. And I could make sense of it in a little bit more. And so it's like a guiding light for me. It's like, wow, that's like a guiding star, and every day I can touch it. It's like moving a little bit closer in that direction. So, and I think when we touch this text tonight, we can see the kind of the heart of the Bodhisattva. Not just the heart, you can see his actions, you can see his thoughts, you can see not this section, but what also he says, what he does with his mouth. And so this really is you can say, a complete guide to how to be a bodhisattva, how to be this great being, you can say, this great and awakened being, walking on this path to Buddhahood, to awakening. So what I would like to invite everybody to do is to read the passage for this evening. We'll be doing two parts. Last week we did this middle paragraph on this page, on page 12 and page 13. But I would actually review it because we didn't have a chance last time to finish it. And also thought that it really connects well with the previous section, which we talked about 2 weeks ago. And so to connect it all together, I thought it'd be really valuable just to review it and finish it for people so that people had a sense of that part was completely finished. So if I can invite everybody to recite alongside with me. It's on page 12 is the Chinese. For those who are maybe still learning Chinese, you can try to follow the romanization on the bottom or just listen. But I welcome people just to try it out. You can try out your muscles in your mouth, a different way of speaking, and see how that goes. So it starts with 菩萨. 菩萨修行如是功德，为不舍一切众生故，本愿所持故，大悲为首故，大慈成就故， 思念一切智之故，成就庄严佛土故，成就如来力，无所谓，不共佛法，好像因生悉知足故，求于上殊胜道故，随顺所闻生生佛解脱故，思为大之善巧方便故。Yeah, page 13. The Bodhisattva cultivates meritorious virtues like these in order to not abandon any living being, in order to sustain his original vows, because great compassion for him is foremost, because he accomplishes great kindness, because he keeps the wisdom of omniscience in mind, so as to adorn Buddha lands, so as to realize the Tathagata's powers, fearlessnesses, uncommon Buddha dharmas, hallmarks, characteristics, and voice, because he seeks the highest and most sublime path, because he follows in accord with the deeply profound liberations of a Buddha that he has heard, and because he reflects on great wisdom's skillful, expedient means. So, just to quickly review, 2 weeks ago we went over the Noble Eightfold Path, and we explained how that was part of the 37 Wings of Awakening. Essentially, these are methods of practice that the Bodhisattva learns and practices so that, and we get this list, why does he do that? So that he can not abandon any living being, because he wants to fulfill his vows, so he goes through this entire list. And basically the Bodhisattva is cultivating these for all beings to realize Buddhahood. And so I thought that this is a good reflection for all of us in terms of what motivates us on the spiritual path. And in Buddhism, one approach among many to look at that is with 3 categories. One is going after, you can say, heavenly blessings or rewards, or worldly blessings and rewards, the first one. The second one is, you can say, arhatship, or ending outflows, leaving samsara, leaving the cycle of birth and death. And the third one is the bodhisattva's path, the wish to rescue all beings, to realize Buddhahood. So you can say those are the 3 ways of approaching the spiritual practice. So the first one, just to illustrate that one, I thought, I don't know if people knew, but if you look at the DRBA calendar, last Monday, does anybody know what last Monday was? Anybody? It's not exactly a holiday, but maybe it was President's Day last Monday. Yeah, but it's President. So what can people relate to that? What was last Monday, if people remember? Well, if you looked at it, it's Lord Shakra's birthday. It's Venerable God's Shakra's birthday. And so for people who are unfamiliar with Lord Shakra, he's said to be the king or the chief among gods in the Triamsha heaven, which is translated as the heaven of 33. And so he's somebody who enjoys great deals of blessings. He's enjoys a lot of the happiness that we associate with the gods. Sometimes his name is called Indra. In our Shrangama mantra, we have one section that says Namo Indolaye. That's referring to an Indra. And so his other name is Shakra Devanam Indra, which is Shakra, and the Deva means God, and Indra is chief. So you can say Shakra, chief among gods, is how we hear his name. So it's Shakra's birthday. But I don't know if people know the story about how Shakra got to be Shakra, or Lord Shakra, I should say, Venerable Shakra. He's our god of this realm. And there's a story that's explained about how he became Lord Shakra, which I thought was very interesting. Namely, quite a long time ago, he actually used to be a very poor woman, a very poor woman. So Lord Chakra at one point was a female. So female and male in Buddhism, we can switch back and forth in different lives. So he was a poor woman, and one day, walking along, she saw a Buddha image. Maybe one like behind us. But this Buddha image was exposed to the elements. It was just out in nature, and the wind and the rain and the sun would bake it. And so you can maybe, if it was painted, maybe the paint was all cracking. If it was rock, maybe the rock was cracking. And so seeing this, she made a resolve to restore the image and also build a monastery around it. So she, as a poor woman, didn't have very many resources, but she, with her hard work, was able to restore the image and build a monastery, along with, she got 32 of her friends to help out as well. So these 33 women, who were all pretty poor, worked hard and rebuilt this image, or restored this image, and built a temple. And from those blessings, in the next life, they became the gods of the 33 in the heavens of the 33. And so it's an interesting story because it shows the cause and effect of the blessings, that they did good and then they had a result of heavenly blessings, and that they're in now enjoying happiness in this realm. So that's one story about how good brings good in the worldly way, in the heavenly way. So, but however, if you look at the text that we just read, it doesn't say that Bodhisattva cultivates meritorious virtues like these in order to be reborn in the heavens. It doesn't say that, right? So our Bodhisattva is not using that as her motivation or his motivation. So that's the first one. The second one is that for we say arhats or voice hearers or Pratyeka Buddhas, it's to leave samsara, to transcend birth and death. And so this is, you can say, a higher aspiration. This is trying to end suffering altogether. If people are familiar with the Four Noble Truths, it's the noble truth of suffering, the noble truth, you can say, of the accumulation of suffering. That where does suffering come from? It comes from craving and desires, and how that accumulates. And so then we end up having suffering because those cravings can't get fulfilled. And then the Buddha doesn't just stop there. He says, well, the suffering can end. So the third truth is suffering can end. And then the fourth truth is that there's a way to cultivate to end suffering. And that's the Eightfold Noble Path, which we talked about 2 weeks ago. And so you can say the voice hearers are the arhants. They cultivate with that aspiration in mind. So they basically are cultivating with a sense of restraining their senses, with a sense of cultivating meditation so they have focus of their mind and not going out with their desires, but calming their desires and ultimately transcending. So that in itself is also a great accomplishment, to be able to do that. But again, the Bodhisattva here doesn't have that as her motivation. He doesn't say, this Bodhisattva cultivates to leave samsara. Rather, it says, this Bodhisattva cultivates in order not to abandon any living being. Or maybe another way you can put it is, on behalf of all beings. And also, if you looked at the eighth one on the list, because he seeks the highest and most sublime path, which I would take to be Buddhahood. He is seeking the Buddha vehicle, the Buddha path. And so that's the Bodhisattva's aspiration. And so what can that be likened to? Well, I think there's another interesting story of Shariputra, who is the Buddha's chief disciple and also was the foremost in wisdom. And so a story that was told about him was that he's considered one of the great arhat disciples, which I just described was the second motivation, was that he really had a moment of inspiration. He said, I want to cultivate the Bodhisattva path. And so when he made this resolve, here comes a test. So this often happens in Buddhism. Once you say, okay, I'm going to try something, I'm going to make a vow, I'm going to do something good, then a test comes. Something comes to see if you're really genuine, you really have this stuff. And so this person comes and asks Shariputra, saying, oh, my mother has this ailment, she has a problem. And the doctors say the only way she can be healed is with an eye, from a human eye, but I can't find a human eye. And so Shariputra, in this time, looks at him and says, okay, I'm going to give you my eye. I'm passing the Bodhisattva path, I can give away my eye, although I really cherish it, so he pulls out his eye and gives it to this man. So he pulls out his right eye and gives it to the man. The man looks at it and goes, yuck, you're right, you give me your right eye. This is the wrong eye. I need the left eye. And he takes the eye and throws it to the ground. And Shariputra goes, that was my eye. I really needed that. And so he says, these living beings are really hard to teach. I can't take it. I don't think this is going to be for me. So he decides, he gives up on the Bodhisattva path and goes, okay. No, he does the story, depending on the story. But yeah, so he doesn't give up his eye. And so he retreats. But
it's not my turn to speak yet.
Yeah. So anyways, in that story he kind of gives up the path, and he goes and he doesn't take the Bodhisattva path. And that principle in the story, I think there's many versions of it, of course. You can have but the principle, I think, is clear, which is basically the Bodhisattva is willing to give up everything. Of course, Shariputra is a great Arhat disciple, and so I'm sure his ability to practice and cultivate and give is quite profound. But the Bodhisattva, with their heart, is doing things on behalf of all beings, is able to give up the most difficult things that we cherish. For us, just giving up, just some possession is difficult, much less our body part. And so this is the spirit of what the Bodhisattva can do. And I think that, however, one place that we can connect to the Bodhisattva's heart is with transference. That's something that we do pretty regularly in the monastery, which is transferring merit. And so, for instance, when at the end of the ceremony, we transfer merit, that's a chance to say, any good things that I've cultivated, I can give to living beings. I can give away. I'm not holding it for myself. And that kind of plants a little bodhi seed by seed, moment by moment, day by day, and that accumulates. And so that's what I think is a way that we all can cultivate the Bodhisattva path. So that's what I wanted us to connect that to the previous passage. So this whole passage here is saying the Bodhisattva has cultivated all of these things, which we mentioned is something that comes in Buddhism quite a lot, the 37 wings of awakening, this kind of practice. But the heart that this Bodhisattva uses is something that's very profound. It's something that's very based on kindness. It's based on great wisdom. It's based on compassion. The second one of this list I just wanted to mention was the original vows, because I think vows is something that's extremely important. I don't know if people also heard the story about how the Buddha initially made his vow to become the Buddha. It was in the previous time when he met a former Buddha, I think it's Dipanka Buddha, and at that time the Buddha was a Brahmin, and he saw the Buddha of that time coming, and he saw a puddle of mud, and with a heart of just saying, I don't want the Buddha to have to get his feet dirty. He took his hair and he put it in the mud so that the Buddha could walk over him. And he had his heart in his heart, I want to be a Buddha someday. And so the Buddha of that time looked at him and said, wow, this person really has a resolve. And says, I certify you in the future, you will become a Buddha. And you'll be a Buddha in the Shakyan clan in this time. And you'll have these disciples. And so because of that seed, that vow made many, many eons ago, through many lifetimes of cultivation, the Buddhas, they've become the Buddha of our time. And for people maybe who aren't, the past lives, future lives, those kind of things are something that's very accessible. The principle, though, I think that we can really rely on is the actual idea of vows and the ideas of aspirations, that these really form our lives. Basically, what we intend to do, what we aspire to do, that forms the direction of where we're going. And so, if our aspirations are great, are vast, are great, are wholesome, then we can move in the right direction. And then we find the tools to help us fulfill those vows. And that's what the Bodhisattva is doing. He's found those tools to fulfill his vows. So those next in the list there have been gone over already. So I'll speak from where the nuns left off last time, since they weren't able to do that. I kind of mentioned he seeks the highest and most sublime path, which is Buddhahood. That I kind of mentioned that. So the next one is because he follows in accord with the deeply profound liberations of a Buddha that he has heard. So for follows in accord, I thought that's a very interesting concept, because I think in America, it's not something we usually emphasize, namely following in accord with something. At least for myself growing up in America, the emphasis usually was on being independent, being your own person, being different, being maybe even a little bit rebellious to your parents. I remember one time when I was visiting my family. This was before I became a monk. I was visiting home, and my mom had me talk to one of her friends who was in the Boy Scout troop for my younger brother. And he actually used to be a Catholic monk, which is interesting enough. But he was talking to me about his experiences. But at the end, he told me something. He says, I'm worried about my 12-year-old son. I said, really? What's bothering you about him? He said, well, my 12-year-old son, he listens to me too much. I said, what? He listens to you too much? He says, yeah, I'm worried that he won't be able to come up with his own independent thinking. I'm like, oh, he's 12 years old? 12, yeah. I said, that's very interesting, because, in Chinese culture, that would never happen. No mom or dad would ever say, like, kid listens to me too much and find it a problem or be worried about it. Actually, in Chinese, that's one of the highest praises for kids is, 孩子很听话. Wow, that kid is really good. Basically, 听话in Chinese means listens well. Or maybe sometimes it can be translated as being kind of obedient, follows the parents, listens to the parents. And so I thought that was really interesting, because he has such a different perspective. And I can understand where he's coming from, given the American Western values about independence, about finding your own way. So in American culture, that's the emphasis. So this idea of following in accord isn't something that usually is emphasized. However, at the same time, just to kind of give a flip, I also don't think that if you look at the Chinese idea of 很听话, that's not also the whole picture either. The idea is sometimes kind of just listening to parents or just following along. Sometimes there's a little bit of a tinge of no matter what, you kind of just do it. Whatever your parents say, you just kind of just follow, regardless of what they say. It's kind of like an obedience that's a little bit just blind. And I think that's not the spirit that's being talked about in the sutra either. That's not the spirit that's being talked about in the sutra either. Because it says, he follows in accord with the deeply profound liberations of a Buddha that he has heard. If you look at a story that illustrates this in Buddhism, I think you don't have to look too far. You look at the Buddha's own life. He was a prince in a very you can say wealthy family. He was a prince. He was a kid, a whole kingdom that he could have inherited, and his father wanted him to inherit. But when he found that he had to meet old age, sickness, and death, and the sufferings of life, he said, I'm going to have to find a way out. I'm going to have to get free. I'm going to have to get liberated. I need to accord with the deeply profound liberations of a Buddha. And so he left the palace, cultivated the path, and awoke, and then came back to teach and help all living beings. So he didn't just accord with his parents in that sense. He accorded with principle. And so I think here, the sutras is really useful, and Buddhism is really useful, and because it allows us a kind of a timeless principle that we can use to look at various cultural ways of doing things. And cultures, I think, are a constantly dynamic process. If you look at China's history from 2000, I'm not an expert in Chinese history, but if you just look at Chinese history, there's definitely different time periods, and they had different customs in each period. You can just look at the art of each period and the music of each period. They're quite different. And American culture is maybe just 200 years. So we're in a constant dynamic flux. But what we have here is these sutra texts, which are thousands of years old, and teach this kind of timeless principle. So what I find is that, given my upbringing being kind of in between both cultures, is that Buddhism gives almost another place to reflect from, to look at the cultures that are operating, that are looking, and finding the principle behind it. So I think that's a really valuable idea, to look, using the sutra principles to look at our ways of seeing the world. And the last one on the list is because it reflects on great wisdom's skillful, expedient means. So this idea of expedient means is basically the idea that to teach living beings, you have to teach them according to their conditions. I think probably a very simple analogy would be going to school. You don't teach a first grader the same way you teach a sophomore in high school or a sophomore in college. They're different. And so you teach different things according to various conditions. And in this one, you use great wisdom. You see things really clearly. You have a profound insight on the way that things actually are, and you teach that skillfully. And so I thought of one story here that I thought was might illustrate this, which is another one of the teachers here would tell this story about when he went on a bowing pilgrimage, and he was the Dharma Protector. So he went on a bowing pilgrimage for a little bit more than 2 years, about 2.5 years, and he came from a martial art background, and so he was going on this pilgrimage with another teacher who's here, and before they start off on this pilgrimage, he's the Venerable Master, who's the founder of this monastery. He told this person, he said, I have 4 secret methods, gongfu. I'll teach you four methods. And of course, this person who's into martial arts thought, wow, I'm going to learn some 4 secret martial art moves. This is going to be great. I'm going to learn how to protect ourselves on this journey, on this bowing pilgrimage. So he goes to the master, and the master says, okay, here's the 4 methods. It's the 4 boundless hearts in Buddhism. It's kindness, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. If you ever leave these 4 minds, you're no longer my disciple. And then he said, now give me that axe you have in the back of the car. And then the person's like, what? That's all I can use? I can only use those 4? Because he was coming from martial arts background, was ready to defend, protect if anything came up. And so what he, however, found was that by maintaining those kind of mindsets, he was actually able to be safe on the journey. And whenever he left that was when when danger could occur. And so I thought that was a very expedient teaching and very wise, was basically at that moment, at that time, to a martial artist, how to teach them some insight into doing something. And so that's just an example of great wisdom's skillful, expedient means. So that's just this passage I was just going to go over.
Amitabha everyone, my name is Koshun and I will be continuing today's lecture with the preceding paragraph. Can we have our palms together as we read it? We'll start with the English. Disciples of the Buddha, when the Bodhisattva stays on the ground of blazing wisdom, he makes all views of a body his primary consideration. That is because, with regard to a self, to others, to living beings, to beings with lifespans, skandhas, realms and locations, we regard to those things as arising, being attached to, made to appear and disappear, thought about, contemplated, or regulated, and because with regard to anything that belonging to a self, wealth and possessions and places of attachment, he can become completely liberated. So the second sentence was an extremely long sentence. So I will start from the beginning. Disciples of the Buddha, when the Bodhisattva stays on the ground of blazing wisdom, he makes all views of a body his primary consideration. So the ground of blazing wisdom is also the name of the fourth ground of the chapter we are on. And he makes all views of a body his primary consideration. On the fourth ground, this Bodhisattva specializes or focuses on contemplating his body. And we'll come to that in a bit. But first, let me explain why it's called blazing wisdom. If you are into Buddhist literature or the sutras, light is used a lot to represent wisdom, and darkness to represent ignorance. And why is that? If you see yourself, it's easy to imagine being in a dark room, in a room that's totally dark. If you don't see anything, you won't be able to navigate yourself. And wisdom enables you to see things for what they are. So the analogy of darkness represents ignorance, and wisdom, or the ability to see things as they really are, as light. So when I was growing up in Malaysia, there were a lot of thunderstorms that had a lot of lightning. And having said that, I've been in California for the past 4 years? 4 years. And I have not encountered a single thunderstorm or lightning storm. So it's really scary. It is like the hand of God making a huge clap right next to your ear if the lightning is near. So my memories of how it would be during a thunderstorm, especially at night, would be if me and my family were watching TV, suddenly the TV and the lights would just go off. And if you're lucky, you see the flash of lightning, and then you brace yourself for the thunder or the rumble that comes. So depending on how far the lightning is, you may hear it just immediately after, and that is really deafening, and it scares the living daylights, it would, out of you, or it would come as a distant rumble. And what would happen is then there would be a very careful getting up, because it would be pitch dark, it would be at night, all the street lights would be out, and you would have to navigate yourself like this in the dark. And we would have flashlights. It wasn't very common. It would happen maybe once every 2 or 3 months, but often enough, so that usually my family would have flashlights all around the house. And being the son, being one of the youngest, it would always be my job to stand up and hope I don't trip over any furniture and have my hands like this. Sometimes I would bump against a wall or hit something low that my hands would not be able to to feel. So basically, if you navigate yourself in the dark, you get hurt. And if you're in the home, it's pretty safe as compared to if you were outside. So let's read the sentence again. Disciples of the Buddha, when the Bodhisattva stays on the ground of blazing wisdom, he makes all views of a body his primary consideration. Now that sounds a lot like all of us. He makes all views of a body his primary consideration. Why do I say that? I just had a report. I just saw a report recently that told me, they had some statistics about how much money we spend on cosmetics. It is called Beauty at Any Cost by the YWCA, and they have a whole list of references where they got the information from. Does anyone have any guess how much just in the US alone is spent on women's cosmetics? You raise up a hand while you're scratching your ear. Okay. $5 billion. Close, but no cigar. It's $7 billion. $7 billion is spent just in 1 year on women's cosmetics. And that's just from this report. Another report, when I saw this report, I said, that can't be true. That's, $7 billion a year, that's a bit too much, and just in the US alone. But according to another apparently professional report on the industry, cosmetics and toiletries, $38 billion in the US, and this is in 2011. Worldwide sales, $426 billion. And that's a lot of money, just because we feel that we have to look good. And for the men who are feeling smug, or if you're looking across the aisle at the women and say, yeah, you spend a lot on cosmetics as well, and toiletries, apparently $4 billion a year, and it's growing. So this is not a critique about society, but more these are facts. And in this report, it's really interesting. It lists why, it attempts to explain why so much money is spent. For example, 80% of people wear cosmetics because they feel that it gives them an age, or it makes them, and it also contributes to their self-esteem. So without relying on cosmetics, they actually have a lower self-view of themselves. It happens in the workplace. If you are seen as to be ugly, you actually earn less than someone who's seen as attractive. And this is the situation that's caused by the whole society nowadays. So that's how we see the self, the body. We identify the body with ourselves. I recently had a revelation about the body. The body is impermanent, right? Well, I never knew that teeth could actually move. I was looking in the mirror the other day, and I realized that my smile looked different. I was just brushing my teeth, and I realized one of my teeth had moved. Slowly, maybe, but it had moved enough for me to notice, and that was pretty surprising. So if you read further, we actually see that the Bodhisattva's view of a body is very different from how we view a body. The second sentence says that is because with regard to a self, to others, to living beings, to beings with lifespans, skandhas, realms and locations. It's a long sentence, so I'll just skip to the end. He can become completely liberated. So in essence, what this means is that the Bodhisattva is completely free of the view of a self. So what makes a self? What do we see as being us? What is our view of ourselves that we actually see for ourselves that the Bodhisattva has become liberated from? It says here, skandhas, realms and locations. Since there's so few of you, I have many questions today, so everyone gets to a question. Does anyone know what the skandhas are? I'll give you a hint. There's five skandhas. Okay, form is one skandha, feeling, perception or cognition, activities, and consciousness. Before I go past this to the realms, the 18 realms and the 12 locations, in order to make sense of what these are, you can divide them into two categories: form or the body and the mind. Okay, so all worldly phenomena as we know it, the world as we think it exists, falls under all these categories. And the skandha is just one way of categorizing the world, the entire world as we know it. The realms is a different way of categorizing it, and locations is also another way of categorizing it. So as we go through this, you see that it overlaps. So the skandhas, form skandha, that's very easy to identify as form. What is the form skandha? It's mainly the body, because it's something that has a form, but it also extends to this cup, for example. The book that I have and the bowing bench that's just run in front of you, that's form. There's also feeling. Feeling are sensations or perceptions that are related to the body. So sitting here, I can feel that this cushion is soft, and if I were to touch this wooden floor, it's harder and it's also colder. I'm trying not to rely on my notes, so please bear with me. The third one is cognition or perception. When I see this cup, I perceive that it is brown. I perceive that it is actually a cup, and I perceive this as a wooden fish that has different functions. So perception is actually a discrimination of the mind. So far you have forms, that's basically everything that you see, the ground that you're sitting on, and then you have feelings, which are related to the body, and then you have the thinking or the discursive part, when you see something, how you interpret that thing to be based on your own experience. And then we come to the fourth one, which is activities. Activities can be described into three categories. The first one is volitional activities. So what does that mean? We have a cup, that's the form. We have the feeling of me distinguishing it as a cup. Activity means if I tell myself I'm thirsty and I want to drink the water, I reach out my hand, I take the cup and I drink. So that's a volitional activity. So it's the acting out of thoughts. Everyone okay so far? Okay. The second kind of activity are those that are conditioned by karma, or those that are conditioned by habits. For example, my brother used to rub his nose all the time. That's something conditioned by habit. Something that is compulsive behavior that you don't really think about, but you do it. So that's the second kind of activity. And the third activity is autonomous, such as breathing. When you sleep, you don't have to regulate your breath. You will continue to breathe. The heart that's beating in your chest, that's autonomous. So we have these three kinds of activities. And then the last one is consciousness. Consciousness is the awareness that we have that distinguishes the objects that we are seeing and us from the objects. So it's the higher awareness that we have in our mind that's separate from the discursive thought that we have, that we use to discriminate between things. So why this is important? Because if the Bodhisattva, through contemplative meditation, has investigated each of these items, and through investigating these items, he sees these items for what they really are. Yes, Jerry? The third one is cognition. Cognition is a perception of things. is a recognition of things. But the fifth one, consciousness, is an awareness, an innate awareness that allows that consciousness to, that allows that perception to happen, and also is a self-awareness that you know that you are seeing something. So one is just plain, just thought that's based on the object. The other one is based on a self and awareness of the object. You could say that one is self, the other one is external, perceivement of external objects. Can you help me out?
I think if you look at the Chinese, the third one is xiang, like oftentimes associated with thinking. The last one is shi, is consciousness. So it's like all the thinking that you associate with something. So it does have the sense of perception, but also you also start thinking about, the cup's brown, it's nice, I like it, I want to take it, but there's an actual base awareness that you even bring to be able to distinguish it.
You are aware that you are taking the cup.
There's an awareness there. So there's a slight difference. And this is just as another kind of reflection. The five skandhas isn't meant, I think, to try to create a kind of a metaphysical way of understanding ourselves. It's actually a way that we reflect on our experience. So if you look at yourself and you kind of look into, okay, so what am I going to? You can say, oh, that's this, that's that, and the idea is to look at so that you can get liberated. So that's the spirit behind this. That's why it's actually really useful as a tool in meditation and understanding ourselves, because we can see how these things are not something we want to attach to, because they kind of hold us, bind us together. They kind of trap us. Does that help? Is kind of.
The third one is relating to objects. You could say it comes up because you see something, and then you distinguish it in your mind. It's a discriminative thought: brown, darker brown, soft, hard. And the fifth one is knowing that you are the one that actually has these thoughts. You need to meditate on it. Okay, so where else do we find the five skandhas? If you have done a ceremony here, we recite the heart or the Prajnaparamita Sutra, and the opening line says, when the Bodhisattva Avalokitesvara practiced the profound Prajnaparamita, he illuminated the five skandhas, and he saw that they were all empty, and he crossed beyond all suffering and difficulty. So what does that mean? We already established that illuminate or light is wisdom. So it says in the beginning, when he was practicing the Prajnaparamita, Prajnaparamita is wisdom of the Buddhas that can bring us to the other shore. Basically, it's transcendental wisdom in a way. So when he was practicing, looking at the five skandhas, he illuminated the five skandhas, meaning he saw them for what they really were, and saw them as empty. And because he saw them as empty, his views or his perceptions on what was actually the world around him changed. And because of that, he was being able to see things as they really were. He crossed beyond all suffering and difficulty.
That's pretty good.
I had a thought in my mind, and it just ran away. Okay, so why am I stressing on the five skandhas, and why did I bring up the Bodhisattva Avalokitesvara? Because when you see through things for what they are, you cross beyond all suffering and difficulty. In everyday life, we have a lot of things that stresses us out. we have to earn a living. Um, we have people that we care for. We have our health. We have our body that will eventually, the word is betray us, because we spend a lot of time and effort in keeping it in good health. But it would fail. I had a friend who was in the travel industry, and this was before I encountered Buddhism. She told me one day, she said, it's really, really funny. I said, what do you mean? She said, if you go on a trip, if you go on a holiday, what would you do? If you go abroad, the first thing that you would do is you would check for your passport, and then you would see if you need a visa, then you would need a plane ticket, and then you would need to make sure you have enough currency in the country's denomination, so you have enough money to spend, that you have insurance, that you know what the weather is like, so you know what to pack, that you have the baggage. And there's a long list that you actually go through just to go either on a business trip or holiday. And some people spend a lot of time planning for a holiday. And then she said, but there's this trip that everyone is guaranteed to take, but no one seems to want to know or want to plan for this trip. And at that time, I didn't really know what she was talking about. I said, what do you mean? She said, death. That's one of the certainties in life, is that your body will eventually die, and that you will have to, there's a trip that you would have to take, but no one wants to know or wants to prepare for that. It's best kept at bay until it's too late. So I reflected on that, and it's really, really true. No one wants to speak about death. Or they may, but they don't want to speak about it in very personal terms. They don't want it to become real. They want it to be at arm's length. Reflecting on my personal experience, even when my father passed away about 2 years ago, I could never quite reflect that one day I could be there, because it's always to someone else. It's never to me. But there's a saying that goes, the graves are full of young people, meaning you never know when your time is up. One day you could be here, the next you will not. And so my friend said it's really strange that people would spend so much time and effort just going on a simple holiday, but they would never plan for this trip that they're bound to take. So yeah, sorry, just a sidetrack. So from the 5 skandhas, form, which is physical, remember the 2 categories earlier? The form or the body, that's one category, physical items, and then the mind, that's the second one. So we had the form, we had feeling. Feeling is related to the body as well, but it's also in between with the mind, because the mind perceives feeling. Cognition or perception of the mind towards physical objects or things that the mind encounters. Activities that the mind instructs the body to carry out in relation to the thoughts. And finally, consciousness, the awareness that drives us, that tells us who we are, that we identify with. For example, I identify myself as a novice monk called Goshun, wearing the latest fashion from the Tang dynasty, complete with the most uncomfortable socks in the world. Really? Okay. So that's consciousness. Yeah. So now we come to the realms. There are 18 realms in total. And what makes the realm? So remember when we talk about the physical part, the form or the body. So the first ones are the body. So what do we have in the body that we relate to in terms of the world? We have the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body itself, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and then the mind. Okay. So by themselves make no sense. So what do the eyes do? The eyes look at physical forms. So when there's a meeting of the eye and the form, the eye consciousness appears. So it's the same for all our senses. You have the eyes with forms, becoming the eye consciousness, so that's 3. So you have another 5, a total of 6 times 3 is 18. So the eyes connect with forms, and then the eye consciousness appears. And then you have the nose, or the ears, hearing sounds. For example, I'm speaking to you right now. So you are hearing me, and that hearing takes place because you have the ear consciousness that appears. And then the same goes for the nose. You smell smells, the tongue, and then the body feels sensations, and then finally there's the mind. The mind has, how would I put it? The mind does not perceive physical objects by itself. It relies on the first 5 consciousness to perceive the whole world around us. So the mind processes information that comes in from my eyes. So my eyes see the cup, there's a meeting, and then an eye consciousness takes place. And then my mind is the discursive thought that lies behind the eye consciousness. And the mind also has dharmas of its own. Dharma meaning any conditioned phenomena. So that, for example, when I sleep, I dream. And that's not in relation to the world. That's just happening in my mind. I can create thoughts within my mind. If you tell me, don't think about a pink unicorn, I will think about a pink unicorn. It doesn't exist in reality, but in my mind it does. So there are 18 realms in total. The eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind that meets with sight, sound, smells, taste, objects of touch, and dharmas. And that leads to the eye consciousness, the ear consciousness, the nose, mouth consciousness, and the body consciousness, and the mind consciousness. So if we go on to the text, that is because with regards to a self, to others, to living beings, to beings with lifespans, skandhas, we've gone through that, realms, we have 18 realms, and locations, there are 12 locations, which are basically the first 12 of the realms without the consciousness. So I won't go through that because it's just an overlap. We regard to those things as arising, being attached to, made to appear and disappear, thought about, contemplated, or regulated. And because we regard to anything that belonging to a self, wealth and possessions and places of attachment, he can become completely liberated. What does this mean? This means that as the Bodhisattva sits in contemplative meditation, he looks at the body and he breaks down all phenomena that he encounters within these categories, and he actually sees that his thoughts arise and fall, arise and fall. So all these things that he perceives to be he takes to make up himself. For example, if I were to analyze who am I on a very this shallow level, I would say I am Koshun. I am who this body is. This body is Koshun. I am my thoughts. I am my feelings. I am the things that I say. I am who I think I am. I think I am a novice monk. That makes me a novice monk. I behave like a novice monk. But what the Bodhisattva does is through his concentration. So he sits and meditates, and he could be you, it could be us, it could be me, sitting meditating, and finally when the mind is calm enough, he investigates. He said, who am I? For example, I could say, am I really Koshun? But when I was young, I wasn't Koshun. When I was 5 years old, I had a different way of seeing myself. When I was 6 years old, I had a different way of seeing myself. Every time I had a birthday, I was different from the person who I was before. And I will be a different person a year from now, 2 years from now. And the change is actually it changes from thought to thought. But because we don't pay attention, we're not really clear as to what's going on. Just like my tooth moving. I never knew my teeth could move, for example. So the Bodhisattva goes further. He says, so before I was born, who was I? And once this body dies, this physical body dies, what will become of me? Why don't I remember who I was? Why don't we remember who we are? Because we are in the dark room. We don't have the ability to see. We don't have the ability to see the consequences of our actions. Why we are here right now. How did I become who I was? If you rely on memory, my memory is not very good. I don't quite even remember what I had for lunch maybe 2 weeks ago. Much less, say, when I was younger, a few years ago, or even a previous life. And I lack the ability to see what will happen to me in 2 years, tomorrow, 6 months, or even when I die. Where will I be? I can't see. For all intents and purposes, I am navigating through life as if I am in a dark room. So what happens? So the Bodhisattva, having seen this, or for someone like me who suddenly understands there's a lot more to the world than I thought it was, how do you actually navigate yourself through life, or to prepare for that big trip if you're more serious in seeing life as it is? In my home, when we had a blackout, we had to look for the flashlights. So the Buddha's teachings, or the Buddha's wisdom, is like a flashlight that we can rely on until we find our own light. The Buddha in his wisdom, because he could see how certain actions lead to certain outcomes, and he saw that most human beings, or living beings, because they're ignorant, they don't understand the consequences of their actions, we create a lot of unwholesome deeds that only result in unwholesome effects returning back to us. For example, my father used to smoke, and he couldn't give up smoking. He tried for a while. Even when, he actually quit smoking, but that was after he was diagnosed as having multiple strokes, and having seen the CRT scan, that scared him into quitting smoking. But before that, when he thought that he was invincible, when he couldn't see, or he didn't want to see that smoking would lead to health issues, he saw no reason to quit smoking. He drank as well. He wasn't an alcoholic, but he drank enough for his body to show signs of drinking. But when he was drinking, there was no way you could convince him otherwise. So it's really hard for us to see the consequences of our actions. One of the ways that I use for my daily life are the 6 guidelines that we introduced. We actually have a rule that anyone who enters our monasteries have to observe the 6 guidelines as long as you're here. I don't think many people know that. But just because of the atmosphere that we have, people naturally follow it. The 6 guidelines are no fighting, no seeking, no greediness, no seeking for personal advantage, no lying, no self.
I'll do it again. No fighting, no greed, no seeking, no selfishness, no pursuing personal advantage, and no lying.
Exactly. It's nice to have a backup. And those are really simple guidelines. No fighting, what does that mean? It means no contention, no arguing, for example. And in the beginning, when I first encountered these guidelines, I saw them as being really restrictive. I didn't see it as a way for me to live my life so that I reduce the harm that I would do. I didn't see it as how we would see a lot of things as being really practical and required. For example, when you drive, you naturally keep to the lines of the road. You would never stray from the road. Why? Because you knew if you strayed, something bad would happen. everyone knows that. You don't need someone to tell you that, because it's so obvious. But because we are living in a dark room under the shadow of ignorance, and because we can see the outcomes of our actions, I couldn't tell. I didn't understand why I should not fight, why I should not contend. Until one day, when I was practicing meditation, I was learning to practice meditation. And in the morning, I had an argument with my mom. And I don't remember what the argument was. I was probably in the wrong, or maybe she was. But the fact that I was fighting with her had left a stain in my mind that I didn't know. And when I was sitting down to meditate, my mind kept going back to that argument. And there was a feeling of, till now I don't really know how to explain that feeling, but you would probably know if you can reflect on some of your experiences. And then I realized that I was actually fighting not just hurts the person that you fight with, but it also hurts yourself, especially if you take the time to quiet your mind and try to see things for what they really are. And the same goes for stealing, for lying. If you steal something, I'm just speaking rhetorically, is that how you say it? Hypothetically, I'm sure if I were to steal something, I don't have to be meditating, but if I hear a police siren or I hear a knock on my door, my mind will never be at rest. So the guidelines serve for us to live our life in such a way that we have no regrets. But because it's so simple, we fail to see how useful, and we fail to see how much wisdom there actually is. And sometimes we seek out for more profound ways of spiritual ways. But cultivation all comes back to just these two things, as I mentioned earlier, the body and the mind. There's nothing that is outside these two. So the Bodhisattva, on the ground of blazing wisdom, contemplates on the body. And because the body and the mind encompasses the whole world, our perception of the world, once you are able to understand the world as it is, through quieting the mind, as in the Prajnaparamita Sutra, you can cross beyond all suffering and difficulty. And I would want all the people that I care for to actually navigate through life without suffering and difficulty. My mom is still alive. She's going to encounter, she's about 79, and did I get it right? Yeah. And 73. Oh, sorry, Mom. If she's listening online. And that's inevitable, old age, sickness, and death. And I would want her to be free from all that. And the only way I can do that is to get, to cultivate, to have a flashlight and to be able to shine the way for my mom. And what flashlight? I'm relying on the Buddha's wisdom. Until I can have my own light, then I can hopefully give out flashlights to everyone. It's close to 9 o'clock. We usually stop at 9. Do we have any questions?
Any questions on the passage today? Yes.
Well, personally, I don't know of any heavenly being. Does anyone? I mean, I don't mean it as a joke, but I guess for heavenly beings, they would have a different way of perceiving, and because the Dharma is expedient, they would have different dharmas to practice on. Does that answer your question, or are you asking this in relation to the Bodhisattva, as in the Bodhisattva might be in a formless realm? Well, they might not have actual physical forms, but they would have mental forms that they would still perceive, and they would contemplate on that.
So I know that there's some heavenly people, they don't have form, but they use light to talk to each other. So that light considered as form.
Well, if you, it's okay. Let's call it mental formations. So any movement of the mind in perceiving something. So for us, we may not perceive light as in how they perceive, but it's still the same movement of the mind or the consciousness. So I guess it's relative to where you are and how you would perceive things according to your form or formlessness. Yeah, but that's beyond me. I'm just guessing. Maybe if I go to heavens, I'll come back and let you know.
Yeah, we're not quite there yet, or we're not there currently.
Yes, YC. Yes, YC. One thing to remember is that although this has been stated as what the Bodhisattva cultivates, but it is also what we cultivate at this level. And why is this? Is because everyone cultivates to his or own ability. So the Bodhisattva may have a different, may have his mind at a different level. So he cultivates the same principles, but at a totally different level. It's more subtle, and it's more profound. So just as when I started out on meditation, my contemplations of the body was very different as to now. Yeah.
Maybe just a thought in terms of listening to the sutras. Recently, we were just at this, or at least I was at the City of 10,000 Buddhas, and we were listening to a sutra lecture. And in the sutra lecture, they were talking about how to listen to sutras. And I think this principle is very valuable. That's why I remembered it. It kind of stuck in my mind for now we're discussing the sutra. I want to share with everybody was that basically when we listen to the sutra, it's really rich. I mean, if you actually listen to this whole talk tonight, there's quite a few principles that were being discussed. And so the idea is, if any of those principles you find useful in your life, just try to take that and apply that, maybe for a week, maybe for however long. And any of the other ones that maybe didn't quite make sense, or maybe at this moment doesn't seem useful, you can put that to the side, but use what you can take. And if you can just find one thing each time, it really come out with something very precious. So I mean, in this one today, we talked about the views of, Goshonshu here was talking about the views of the body, and not making it as primary consideration, and talking about how we view the body and how the Bodhisattva is liberated from the body. I mean, that's just a really interesting way of seeing the world, given in comparison with what we're usually exposed to. And so that's just one contemplation. So the idea is, after we hear it, we have to think about it. And so what I maybe encourage is that if anything came in this talk that was maybe useful, take it as something that you maybe will want to reflect on for the week. So, almost time. Is there any other questions? Okay.
What?
What is this? It's a very vague question. I don't know.
I don't know.
You can type I don't know, yeah. Any other questions? or thoughts? Okay. Anything you want to add? Okay.
Yeah, so today Chinmay and myself get to practice giving under very stressful conditions, I might add. And all of you get to practice patience in listening to us.
So we have the dedication of merit. I believe it's in the book. Madalena's class? Okay, so we have Madalena's Dharma Instruments class, which will be starting next week on Saturday, March 2nd and March 9th. It's from 2 to 4 p.m. It's going to be here in the Buddha Hall, Saturday 2 to 4 p.m. So she's actually really a good teacher of the Dharma instruments if you're interested in learning how to use the handbell and the fish, because I believe she taught the original disciples of Western disciples when she arrived in America, because she was actually the one who invited our founder, Venerable Master Xuan Hua, to America. And so she actually taught our many of the early monks and nuns how to use the instruments, because she came from Asia. So it's a good class for sure.
Dharma Master She might be lecturing next week because of a death in her family. She's had to take care of several family matters. So for those of you who are expecting Dharma Master She to be here this evening, I know it's a little late, but surprise. Maybe next week.
So the dedication of merit? Do people have that? I don't see people have it in their book. Can somebody pass it out? Can you get Tom? So, just to introduce dedication of merit, we mentioned the Bodhisattva's heart and cultivation. And so this is a way that we, almost every hour in the monastery, we have a dedication of merit of some sort. We have it in our ceremonies, in our various chants. It always comes up. And basically, it's using our mind in a way to say what we do is we're giving out the things that we're doing. So today we went over some principles and learning about how the world works, you can say, how we can get free, how the Bodhisattva's heart is, and that's got a goodness to it. And so we have an opportunity to take that and say, I want to give it to all beings so that they can be happy and peaceful and realize ultimate awakening. Or maybe a family member is sick and ill, you want to wish that they'll be better. So it's a sense of a good wish out into the world. So we have a song that helps us contemplate that. So people have that? Okay. So if you would like to put your palms together, you're welcome to. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may their minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of their endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. So if people would like to, you can join us to bow to the Buddhas. We'll stand up and bow 3 times. And bow to the Venerable Master Xuan Hua.